There are plenty of words in the English language that are disdainful, hurtful, nasty, and downright awful. But there are two words that are unavoidable and from which we often run: death and dying. No one enjoys grief, sadness, or loss. Those words are so damn final. When I was in social work school, I read Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's book, aptly titled On Death and Dying, her seminal work at that time. Kubler-Ross introduced what is known as the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. A 6th stage was more recently added by a colleague of Kubler-Ross's, David Kessler, finding meaning, or maybe even a concept of hopefulness. At a relatively young age, I had the experience of losing grandparents and even a good friend, but I missed the dying part and only got the death part after the fact. That might be why, when I had the opportunity with my then living grandmother and my stepfather, 2 people who were incredibly important in my life, to be with them when each received a diagnosis, I was able to share with them what they had meant to me over the years that were remaining. I even get a little emotional thinking about it. I am so very grateful for that. I need to take a moment and mention the very recent passing of poet and activist Andrea Gibson. They, along with their partner Megan Foley, share their intimate wrestle with cancer and their amazing efforts to live fully, which with a cancer diagnosis had to have been an incredible challenge every day. I have to share their words here. Dying is the opposite of leaving. I want to echo it through the corridor of your temples. I am more with you than I ever was before. Incredibly powerful. Many religions, cultures, and even families have their sacred rituals, which often allow the living to celebrate those whom they have lost. And yet, we, as Americans, often struggle with talking about it. Welcome to Small and Gutsy, our podcast featuring nonprofits and social enterprises under $10 million. My name is Dr. Laura Shirk-Witkoff, and I'm excited and proud to be your host. We hope you'll love the stories as much as we do, and perhaps you will find needed services, a job, volunteer, invest in, or donate. Small and Gutsy is not just a podcast, but a 501c3 nonprofit. We've just been named number 8 on FeedSpot's top 30 social impact podcasts. We also ranked 9th by Million Podcasts for their top youth empowerment podcasts for some of our episodes. We are truly proud of these rankings and of our vision to spotlight every smaller nonprofit and social enterprise to raise their visibility. So please help me with our vision and send me any organization you'd like featured to laura@smallandgutsy.org. One incredibly gifted creator, producer, and writer decided to take on this subject matter, but not as a passive project, but a fully engaging head-on discussion to move us, make us think, and maybe make us less afraid of the inevitable. Grief Dialogues, The Experience, brings timely conversations about death, dying, and grief to the stage in innovative, humorous, and touching ways. Part theater, part therapy, this edutainment. I just love that creative name. This project began in 2016 with an open call for short plays and was developed from nearly 200 submissions. The original performance was composed of 6 short plays from playwrights across the country. It is a thought-provoking and honest look at the subject of death that invites audiences to reconsider some of the rhetoric and stigmas around this topic. As one of my guests shares, there are 2 of them today, theater is the great empathy generator, and out of grief comes art. I so believe that. Grief Dialogues is also committed to offering accessible and affordable training in compassion for healthcare providers, counselors and therapists, end-of-life specialists, funeral homes, and at-home caregivers. My 2 guests today are truly, truly magical, taking loss and turning it into a beautiful tribute, legacy, and lesson for all of us to not just bear witness, but to be included in our own journeys of grief and loss. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross is a marketing and public relations specialist, a playwright, creator, educator, and speaker who confronts end-of-life issues. In 2016, Copeland created the nonprofit Grief Dialogues along with the off-Broadway play Till Death. She uses theater, the ultimate empathy generator, as the artistic expression to open new conversations about dying, death, and grief. She is a proud member of the Dramatists Guild. In 2019, she joined forces with a palliative care team at a Seattle Regional Hospital to create a series of short plays, followed by a moderated discussion to build empathy and compassion within the medical profession. I adore that, so needed. Grief Dialogue's healthcare education offers CE credits for attendees and participation in the program and is presented throughout the U.S. Kaplan is also the executive producer of the short award-winning film 8 a.m. by Mark Harvey Levine. During each speech, what I love about this is Elizabeth starts a revolutionary conversation the medical community so desperately needs to be having. Thank you, Elizabeth, for doing that. My other guest is Lori Chiaro, writer and producer who has been the vocal music teacher at an elementary school in Los Angeles for over 20 years. She plays piano and guitar. Lori has been writing songs since she was a child. It's innately part of her. She wrote a 15-minute musical with collaborators at New Musicals, Inc. that was produced at the Colony Theater in Burbank. The show was produced a second time at Studio City in Hollywood. And the show we're about to talk about on this episode is being produced at the Hudson Theater on Santa Monica Boulevard 2 weekends in September. I encourage everyone in the LA area to go, the weekends of the 5th and the 12th. Small and Gutsy will be there cheering them on and probably shedding a few tears. Let me share with you that this show that we're about to talk about is based on a true story about Lori and her late husband, Ben, whose cancer diagnosis was the impetus for this creation. Lori will share much more of that in a moment. It's a musical about love, loss, and the power of storytelling, a joyous celebration of the power of love and an ode to classical musicals, which I also think is unbelievable, that juxtaposition of both. A heartfelt, inspiring journey that follows David Hamilton and his wife Lucy, based on Ben and Lori, as they write a romantic comedy in the wake of David's cancer diagnosis. As their real-life challenges unfold, so does the story of Olive and Blake, a young couple in the 1950s navigating love, laughter, and misadventures. I am beyond honored to welcome my two guests today. Elizabeth and Lori, your passion to turn this tough issue into something clearly heartfelt, meaningful, and instructive allows the emotional opening for others. And for someone like myself with a cancer diagnosis, I feel deeply moved by what you are doing. So let's get started. Welcome, Elizabeth and Lori, to Small and Gutsy, to our family. Elizabeth, do you want to start? Because you have started this 501c3 Grief Dialogues, and I'd love for you to start, and then Lori's going to jump in about this particular project and play, which is remarkable. So tell us about how this started, how this idea came about.
Well, it's actually a funny story, as many stories are, right? I've always loved theater. I moved to New York City shortly after high school to be an actress and studied at New York Academy of Theatrical Art, etc. And then one day realized I could eat or I could pay rent. I could not do both. So I finished my college degree and went on to have a marketing career. But I always loved theater and I always would go to theater. And I always had the idea in mind that when I retired, I would maybe do some acting or some directing. And as the years went by, it was pretty clear that the older I got, the less likely I was going to do acting and maybe even directing. So I started writing. And I started writing plays. But what happened, what triggered Grief Dialogues, was that my cousin died of ovarian cancer. And my sister and I were with her during her final week of life. Her mostly newlywed husband of about 6 years was just so devastated that he was useless. And we had to give him assignments to do, so he wasn't like literally in the way. But I was with her when she died. And then at that same time, a friend of mine lost her husband in a freak accident. And I also had another person very close to me die. And all of that was happening down in Southern California. I'm up here in the Seattle, Washington area. At the time, I worked for the University of Washington School of Law. And I came back after being gone for about 10 days, and people knew I had been in Southern California. So they, oh, what'd you do on vacation in Southern California? And oh, well, I sat by the bedside of my dying cousin. And they immediately changed the subject or suddenly remembered a phone call they had to make, and they left quickly, right? And so I thought, okay, I'm going to channel my thoughts into this play. And it's a short play called Hospice, A Love Story. And it's two sisters the day after their mother died, talking about what happened while the mother was dying. And they both had totally different memories, even though they were both in the same room.
I love that, yeah.
And so friends of mine said, hey, submit these to the 10-minute play festivals. I did. And I started winning them. Now, we all know the only thing you get is a performance, but it was great. And I would travel to many of them. And when people in the audience knew that I had written the play, afterwards they'd come up and they'd say, wow, that was a great play. But you know what? Something like that happened to me when my mother died. And then they would go off on their own stories. And I realized it wasn't my brilliant writing at all. It was the fact that I had opened the door to other people sharing their stories. And that's why that we got to have more stories. And it can't be just my voice or my experience. It's got to be other people's voices and experience. And that's when we brought in additional playwrights and had submissions. And then we ultimately opened, I believe it was in September of 2017, we opened the Seattle Death Salon, which is part of the Order of the Good Death. I don't think they're doing the Death Salon anymore, but they have done them in Boston and LA and other places. And we opened it in the audience, of course, kind of a ready-made audience because they were there for the conference, but they just loved it and it exploded from there. So that's kind of the story of how it all began.
So amazing. And I love that history because I didn't know most of it. And I think what is so beautiful about, there's so many things, but one comment I want to make is the fact that you could tell a story from two different vantage points or two different perspectives, because we all have them. And so we have them as siblings in our own household, right? We have them. And so when we're in our own tunnel vision, we don't really think about what other people are experiencing. And I think the beautiful thing about life and the journey, and also about death and dying, even though that doesn't feel so beautiful and it's hard to talk about, is the community surrounding when you have a chance to process. Whether it is someone where it's impending or where you know it will be inevitable for all of us, you create that community in some way. I hate to use this because it's not really like this, but a community of prayer in some way. It's a community of hope. It's a community of togetherness. It's a community that reduces the isolation and loneliness that you felt in that very first conversation coming back from, quote, vacation, when people said all of a sudden had a phone call or had something else to do. So, gosh, I'm moved by your origin story, frankly. And when you got those submissions, because I think you got over 200 submissions when you first started, right? How did it feel for you to read those, knowing that you were opening kind of a floodgate in some ways?
Right. You know, it's interesting. First of all, I tell you, unfortunately, over half of them just by the end of the second page, they weren't the quality I was looking for.
Yeah.
And then when I did narrow it down to about 20, I actually had a very objective set of criteria that I wanted. I had put a team together and I narrowed it down to 20 that I thought were producible and on message and had nice variety. And I sent them all to my team and they evaluated it as objective as something subjective like art can be.
Right.
And from that, we went there. But I guess it was the actor in me. Actually, I had a young woman working with me at the time and she said, "Can I take a break? I need to read something other than dead baby stories," and I laughed because to me, that was like that was what we did, we shared stories. They're beautiful. And I think that when you talk about it, it's so hard. I try to empathize with my audience because I have never found it hard to talk about. I guess I've just been around so much beautiful death. Oh my gosh, beautiful death. And then some awful death that could have been beautiful. That I really want to say no. And I will say that was one of the things I just loved about Let's Write a Musical is, yes, there's death, but it's a beautiful death. We should all be so lucky to have someone love us as much as Lucy loves David. To create something that people like Lucy and like his wife and others are going to remember you by. I mean, that is just the most beautiful death you can think of, right?
It's a great legacy.
So I never go down that dark alley. I guess I'm just lucky. My son and his wife are visiting because our other son's getting married this weekend. And they just bought a house in Kingston, New York. And it's right next to a cemetery. And I just went, black people, To me, it's all about, I don't want to say not taking it serious. I want to take it seriously, but not being afraid of it. I could tell you at least off the top of my head, 4 death stories of people who embraced the fact that they were going to die, had everyone around them comfortable and laughing and carrying on. And the widow in one case said to me later, I said, "How you doing?" She said, "How can I do anything other than be great?" Because Mike was fine with this. The only stipulation he had was his son was getting married in the summer and he wasn't going to be there for it. He just didn't want anybody to talk about wedding plans. But other than that, he cheered everybody up.
Yeah.
So it really helps with grief when the person who's dying makes it like, this is what happens. It happens to all of us.
Yeah.
I also want to point out one thing. For me, there are people out there, Lisa Paul at Death Deck, Stephanie Elkins at Be Kind. They go into the homes or the hospitals and they help to make that beautiful passing. They really do. So there are people who can help with that if you're not up to the task, which, quite frankly, if it's a loved one, I would be very challenged to actually be up to the task. But the other thing I want to say is, and the reason why I just love Laurie's play again, is the feeling of hope.
Right.
And as you mentioned, and I love David Kessler, this is not against David.
Right.
He did not come up with that.
Oh.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross came up with hope. In her original book on death and dying, it was in there, and the publisher took it out.
I didn't know that. Okay.
So you'll have to have Ken Ross on your show sometime, Elizabeth's son, who's a very dear friend of mine. But they took it out, and I don't remember. I think it was because the publisher just wanted 5 stages.
Bizarre.
Because it was a better number than 6 or some silly thing.
Yeah.
And I think the new rendition of On Death and Dying will have hope put back in. So as you mentioned the play, I've approached Ken about having Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation be a major supporter. He made me promise, because I told him in the play, I put in the 5 stages. They're not linear, and you do some of them twice. They were never meant to be linear. And you do some of them twice and 3 times. And he said, yes, I'd be more than happy, because he's done work with me before, more than happy to endorse the play as long as you put hope in there. And I said, you got it.
Yeah, that's great. I love that so much, and I love the correction. So I think Kessler created finding meaning, and maybe that got converted from her original concept of hope, or who knows what. So it's really interesting how things get recorded so differently, and I so appreciate that. And before I toss it to Laurie, he triggered so many things personally for me. I had an uncle who knew he was going to die, and so we had a huge party that was a celebration of life for him. And it was touching and wonderful, and he got to be there, and he got to talk about it. And it was probably maybe 6 months or a year later, I can't remember, that he died. But it was more important to go to that almost than to his funeral, because it was while he was still alive. So I think that's just an incredible opportunity. And I also really appreciate that there are lots of people who help with that end of life if you choose to and need to. And also, it resonates so much that I love that you're not afraid of it. Really interesting. I have 4 children, and we lived in a community that had an absolutely beautiful cemetery. And we used to take the kids there all the time. And we used to do our holiday pictures at certain gravestones. It happened to be a dog one that we liked, and the kids would sit on the dog. I still have those pictures. And the reason we started going there is because we lived in an old Victorian, and it was half of a 2-family, and it was built and designed by a female architect in the 1800s. She couldn't practice really, so she had enough money to build a house. And so we found her grave, and so we'd go celebrate her. And that's what we did year after year, often. And my kids probably still go there who live in New England. But it is an incredible memory for me that I love that we did. So you triggered a few things in my thought process that were actually quite positive. So I'm going to toss it to Laurie, because you do take this incredible real story, your life with Ben, and the sudden shock of his diagnosis, and you turned it into something that is joy-filled and also takes us down a path that allows us to think of our own lives and our own loved ones. And I'd love to hear sort of how that came about for you.
How it came about. Ben was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And that was really bad news, needless to say. But Ben had always loved singing and goofing around dancing, and he was really one of those wannabes. He was in the computer business. He never sang or performed professionally, but man, did he have a little tiny fantasy going on that might happen in his lifetime. So writing the musical and then performing it for him was just so wonderful. We had a solo for him, and he sang it, and he nailed it, and just had the time of his life. We all did. We were a cast. We'd written it, and then we put it on in our living room for 50 guests. And there's a landing in our hallway that we could stand up and be above the living room floor. So it was like a little stage, and we did a reading, singing of the show. We were a cast of 6, and 2 of Ben's grown sons flew out from Chicago to play their roles in the show.
Wow.
And the other 2 were sidekick friends of Ben's and mine. They played the sidekick roles. And a piano player and the works. And I always say, of course, we got a standing ovation at the end of the show. I mean, you've got 50 friends in one place, so you're going to get a standing ovation. But they genuinely loved the show and really loved watching Ben ham it up and have that moment, that place in the sun where he got to do that thing he always wished he could do, which is to perform for a live audience.
You gave him an end-of-life party. You really gave him an end-of-life celebration, and you fulfilled a dream of his, and at the same time used your skill and talent to make that happen. I can't imagine a better combination.
Yeah, it was really fun. The audience loved it so much. And I joke about how Ben actually shared with me that the musical for him was more fun than our wedding.
I love that.
And I know he had fun at our wedding. I was there.
I'm glad you didn't take that personally, and I'm so glad he could say that. But think about that as a gift, Lori. Like, that is one of the most selfless gifts I've ever heard. Because even though you may have enjoyed writing it and you collaborated with him and he sang and it was part of it, it took work and it took effort. And this was also while he was having chemo. There had to have been ups and downs.
It was such a joyful effort. And we had a duet at the end of the show. And Ben loved taking baths while he was going through everything. He found it very soothing. So I'd sit on the edge of the bathtub and we'd practice our duet. Now, mostly all we did was laugh at how awful we sounded. But man, was that fun too. I mean, the whole process was fun. The rehearsals in the living room with our sidekick friends. We even had a friend who's a director who came and kind of helped us. She directed it up, made it even better than we all would have been able to make it without her. But there was so much laughter and so much fun. It was really honestly like he didn't have cancer.
I love that so much.
It was really like he didn't have cancer. The cancer wasn't on the table. When we were rehearsing, when we were performing by the bathtub, the cancer was never on the table. I don't even think it was in the back of our minds, honestly. We were just so caught up in the joy of the show that it just was what we were all about.
So incredibly beautiful. When you and he decided to do this and you took it upon yourself to sort of make it happen while he was going through treatment, what was the timing? Like, how long did it take you to write and create this? And then how long before he passed away?
He was diagnosed in August of 2016. We started writing the show pretty soon after that. We had rehearsals with the cast probably starting around the holidays of 2016, early 2017, because I know we put it up in the living room in 2017.
Amazing.
I don't remember that well. I think it was in the spring of 2017. And then a year later is when he died.
I mean, you gave him this gift and you gave it to each other. And I can't think of anything more beautiful. Most people might say, I want to travel in my last year or whatever I have left. I want to do this. And again, as Elizabeth said, you gave this as a legacy, and not only for each other and for your respective families, but also for your audience, for the rest of us who can now rethink, based on Elizabeth's nonprofit in so many ways, how we choose to do this, because it's inevitable. So we get a choice now in how we want to face what may happen to any of our loved ones or happen to us. And as I said in the opening, I was so grateful, both with my grandmother and my stepfather, that I knew that they were going to die within a couple of years. No one really knew for sure, obviously. And with each one of them, I was so delighted that I got to say to them how much they had meant to me, how much they had taught me. I wanted them to leave with that knowledge, and I got to do it. And with my earlier death experiences of friends and my other grandparents, and I was younger, but even with a friend, I was in my 20s. I only learned after the fact. And that's really hard. And sometimes that just happens, right? But the process of facing it and being able to do something that is heartfelt and constructive for the relationship, or at least in that sense for me, I wanted to give them back what they had given me, what they had done for me. So I just love what you did. And then share with me a little bit about how this new iteration has come about with this incredible musical.
So Ben and I put it up in the living room. And then after Ben died, I had a video of the musical. And many years earlier, I had taken this musical theater songwriting class. The artistic director of New Musicals, Inc. is Elise Dewsbury. And I'd studied with her. She'd been my teacher. So I took the video of me and Ben in our play to Elise Dewsbury at New Musicals, Inc. and just had her look at the musical to see if she thought I should do anything else with it. And she said, you should put it up at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. So I thought okay, I'll do that. And I got introduced to John Coppola, the director, and showed him, I don't think I showed it to him. I described to him what the show was about. And he said, well, that's interesting. Boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back again at the end. That's a sweet story. It's been done before. Why don't you tell me why you wrote the musical? And when I told him the reason, he said, well, that's your show.
Right.
That's your show. It's a show about a couple writing a musical while he's going through cancer treatment. And I said, okay, let's do that then. And things happened during rehearsal. I would come to rehearsals. One time, I was teaching music at the elementary school, still am, and I would come a little late to the rehearsals. Johnny would have worked with the actors already. And one time I came in and they were reenacting a scene with me and Ben, and it really got me right in the heart. And I was sitting there in the audience watching the rehearsal, and I just started crying. And all the actors saw me and raced up and wrapped themselves around me and gave me this group hug, sort of like we're all in it together. And Johnny wound up writing that into the story at the end. When David dies and Lucy comes down the stairs and joins the musical for the first time, they all surround her and hold her, and that's what happens at the end. David goes off into the light, and the cast surrounds Lucy.
You're making me tear up because your real life experience gave way to this artistic expression that then allows other people to both consider what they would do, but also, I think, touches them so emotionally. And then I think Elizabeth's piece has so many pieces, but one piece is then how do you talk about it? So you see it, and then it doesn't just sit there and people necessarily leave, but you have the opportunity to really talk about it. So, you were very real. You're very real and very raw. And I think there's so much to be said to being able to be that vulnerable as a gift to both you and Ben and to so many others. And I hope you hold that in the place in which I'm sharing it, because it's very meaningful. And I want to thank you for doing that, because it really is a gift to so many people. Because you didn't have to be that vulnerable. You could have just let it be what it was. And you didn't. And I'm proud of you for that, because it takes a lot of guts to put it out there beyond your friends, and you did, and you have, and you are doing it again.
And now that's the thing I want to talk about also, is how we're doing it again. The Hollywood Fringe Festival was in 2019. Then, of course, COVID hit, and the show got put on a shelf, even though it was very successful at the Hollywood Fringe Festival. The audiences loved it, and we had standing ovations every night and full houses and standing room only. It was just a wonderful experience, kind of like mind-blowing for me that my little story about writing a show when Ben got sick seemed to resonate with people. But then fast forward to, I think, a year ago, Johnny, who's really my partner with the show now, the director, is now director and partner with me. And he met a woman named Nico Juber at a conference, who's also a playwright and a lyricist and a composer. And Johnny was approaching her about putting up the show again. And she said, it's not for me, for several reasons she gave him. But she said, you've got to talk to Elizabeth Copeland, because I think it's a good fit. So Johnny met with Elizabeth Copeland, and then she can tell you what happened at that meeting. I wasn't there.
Okay, Elizabeth, you're on. But Lori, just beautiful. So where is it now? So what happened at that meeting with Johnny, the director?
Actually, he had sent me the script, and he said that the comments they got from the Fringe were all glowing, except the story was a little on the weak side,
The story about David and Lucy.
David and Lucy, yeah.
Right, that's what I figured, because that's the most sensitive piece that I think is incredibly hard, because you were living it, or you had lived it.
I would also say, I'm not sure weak was the right word. It was light. It was light.
Okay.
And, a lot of people who have gone through cancer situations or have lost someone to cancer, it takes them out when they're sitting there and going, oh, gosh, that couple was awfully happy for someone, And so my marching orders was to make it a little darker, to put the reality of what a diagnosis does to a couple, what the chemo does to a couple, what the end result when there's nothing left to do does to a couple. So I worked on that script, and every week we would meet and we'd go over the sections and I'd tweak and so forth. And then in November, we met at Lori's house and did a reading of it. And then I could really hear it and tweak it. At that point, actually, I think what John said to me, I think it's a little too dark now, so, so I had to kind of lighten it up. And there were some things, I mean, it seemed like the only thing we talked about was either cancer or the musical. And we needed another plot line, and we needed a humorous plot line.
Yeah.
So I love writing comedy. I don't always write it, but I love writing it. So then I wove in another topic, and you have to see the show to find out what it is, but it's very fun.
I love it. We're not going to give it away.
And so then it came to the script it is now, which we feel is probably a little too long, a little heavy, and just like too much writing. But now we're ready to hear the actors do it, and we'll know what to cut then and adjust once we get into rehearsal. So that's how it all evolved in one short year. But what I really want to say about this, and Lori and Johnny in particular, is every week I looked forward to that meeting with them. I just really was excited, and they let me have the space I needed because I was doing a million other things. And if sometimes I wasn't ready to meet, we'd push it off a week. And so it wasn't deadline driven. And I've done things deadline driven and they're fine. But this was just, it evolved naturally, organically, and it evolved with the three of us on Zoom, just really enjoying the heck out of each other and enjoying mutually creating this beautiful piece and taking this true story and making it even blossom more. It's the kind of play, you know, if you don't want to talk about death and dying, it's still a play to come to because it's got so much more going on, right?
Right.
And so it really allowed us the time to blend all those personalities and storylines. I think it's probably one of my proudest creations, quite frankly. And now I've written a lot of plays and even had one off Broadway. And I'm going to say that this process with Lori and Johnny and evolving this show is even more meaningful to me than my off-Broadway production.
Wow, Elizabeth.
Oh, I love that. What a wonderful compliment. That's